Hi, everybody. This is Callie Hammond, and tonight my topic is what's emotions got to do with it? And it's interesting. Before the classes that I took and the experience I had with NLP and timeline therapy and hypnosis, I didn't understand emotions. And in fact, while I was going to the classes, all of a sudden I realized that there were emotions other than what I had, and I didn't understand them at all. I didn't realize that we could have so many emotions. And so during the class and after the class, I actually had to study emotions because I'm like, did not know I could have all those different emotions and it was okay. And the emotion, though, it was interesting because I was trying to explain to somebody the emotion that I had. And I couldn't. I didn't know what the name of the emotion was. I had no clue. I just knew that I cried, and I didn't know what that meant. And it's interesting because whenever like I'd go to a funeral, I just like weep, but I'd stop crying because I didn't want people to know what I was feeling. Because again, I always had that fear that if somebody knew what I was feeling, my emotions, then they'd try to hurt me or could hurt me. And so it was my unconscious mind as well as me consciously working on not showing those emotions. So the thing that I would do not to show my emotions was I anchored myself. I had no clue what anchoring meant even to begin with, but I actually was anchoring myself. And what that means is anchoring yourself to an emotion is by doing something like pulling your ear when you're having like a lot of laughter and a lot of humor. And you pull your ear, all of a sudden, another time when you may not be having that feeling, but you want the feeling, and you pull that ear again, you're going to go back to that time. It's almost like when you smell a certain smell. I know you've all had that experience. When you have a certain scent, like lilac, lavender, or something like that, you all of a sudden go back to a memory, right? Okay, you know that. And or if you see a picture of something, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I remember. And it doesn't have anything to do with the picture that you're looking at, but it reminds you of something else that you had in the past. And so I was anchoring myself. And that's what an anchor is something that helps you to go in the past to remember something either pleasant or unpleasant. And the goal is actually to anchor yourself with pleasant emotions so that when you need those pleasant emotions again, when you're having to deal with unpleasant ones, you can counterbalance those. And so unfortunately though, what I was doing was I was anchoring myself in very negative emotions. So I'd go to a funeral or I'd go to church where there was high emotion and like sadness. I didn't realize it was sadness. I just knew I wanted to cry. And I'd come away from church having these terrible sinus headaches. And I didn't understand why. It was because I was stuffing those emotions literally into my sinuses, or I was stuffing the emotions into my stomach, or I was just stuffing the emotions, keeping them down. The other thing that I would do is I would put my fingernail, drive it into my hand when I was having these strong emotions so I wouldn't show anybody I was having these emotions. So like if my boss wanted to talk to me and I felt anxious or fear or whatever that was, and I didn't understand the emotion, I just drove my fingernail into my hand without anybody seeing it. It was very pretty, nobody sees that. Drove my fingernail into my hand. And again, I was anchoring that emotion in myself. I had no clue about it. I didn't understand it. And so once I understood anger, sadness, guilt, those emotions, I was like, oh, I get it now. I'm allowed to have those emotions, one, which I said again in another video, but also there are many emotions. And when I did research, there are like over 3,400 emotions that a human being can have. That was beyond me. I was like, okay, I know what anger is, that's for sure. And I knew what depression, sadness was, that was for sure. I knew an inkling of happiness and joy sometimes. It was a very fleeting thing though for me. And because I was so centered on anger and sadness and depression constantly, that's where my view and that's where it was. And so I did this search to understand what I was feeling, where were these other feelings coming from? What was it? And what I found out, and I'll put a link underneath the video too, it's called, and excuse me if I don't pronounce it right, because I'm not a psychology major or anything, but it's called the Plutchik's Wheel of Emotion. Again, excuse me if I'm not pronouncing it right, but it gives you an idea about the 8 basic emotions. The 8 basic emotions are joy, trust, fear, surprise, sadness, disgust, anger, anticipation. So the question is, if you're having stress right now, or anxiety, or any of those kinds of feelings, where are they coming from? That's the other thing too, is that if you're having stress, like I was having stress when at work, when they were bullying me, right? Well, where was that coming from? Why was I stressing over that? Some people don't have a problem with that, but I did. Why was it? What was it triggering? And I realized as I was studying this, I'm like, okay, why was I dealing with that? I was anger. I was disgusted. I had fear also, because as a kid, bullying was huge, as well as a child when I was abused. That's the same type of emotion, is fear. Distrust, or not distrust, but the opposite of trust is actually disgust or loathing, or those different things. And so whatever you're feeling, there's a reason why you're feeling it. And the reason why you're feeling it is probably because there's some emotions connected to whatever's going on. So isolation, what's that bringing up for emotions? It may be a negative emotion that you have trapped, but you're like feeling stir crazy. Why do you feel stir crazy? That's not an emotion, stir crazy. But stir crazy comes from emotion. Stir crazy is a feeling. You're feeling stir crazy. Why? What's that coming from? You're feeling stressed. Why? What's that coming from? You're feeling anxious. Why? Where is that coming from? Where did that originally come from? And why do you have it there? It's a good thing too to understand that our unconscious mind is in control of those things. Our unconscious mind is what filters our values and helps us to stay moral instead of amoral, and it helps us to be able to filter things out. However, sometimes our unconscious, because it's filtering through all those things, it gets a little confused about perception and understanding. And so a different time I'll talk about the unconscious, because that's an important thing to understand too, that it's not our enemy, but it's our friend. And it's something that's always kept us safe and will continue to keep us safe. It's the reason why sometimes we have nightmares. Our nightmares are not a bad thing. It's when our unconscious is actually trying to work things through, trying to make sense of things, to be able to help us to be safe, to be able to help us to understand what's going on. Since I was a child up to the age of 38, I had terrible night terrors, extremely bad night terrors, and I didn't understand why. And a lot of them, I would wake up feeling like somebody had been hurting me, and believing that that was actually happening. That's what a night terror is. It's like the nightmare, a night terror coming to life, and it leaves you exhausted at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day. You don't want to do anything because it leaves fear, and it leaves sadness and depression. And often mine made me feel guilty and dirty, because there were things that were connected to my sexual abuse as a wee one, and I had no clue. When I turned 38 years old, it was interesting, because when I turned 38, there was a lot going on in my life, very stressful, good stresses, as well as negative stresses, both. At 38 years old, there was a lot of layoffs where I was working as a teacher, and so I had to find another job as a teacher, and I did. I was going to be going to Maryland, but at the age of 38, I had to move. I had to get a new job. I didn't know where I was moving. Thank goodness for some good friends that let me stay with them. That's Linda, whose sister Yep, Sister Will's daughter. And so thank you so much, Linda, for letting me stay with you. And then having to get an apartment and all those stresses, as well as having a relationship, kind of like a fiance, but not quite there. And that's a totally different story. But anyway, the man that I married, he and I were seriously dating at that point. And so all those things, I mean, they were good things and bad, negative things, you know, not having the job, being laid off. But all those things came to a culmination where my night terrors were becoming even more intense, as well as I felt like I was going insane. I honestly did, but I wasn't. But I felt like I was because the emotions were becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And I had no clue what I was fighting. Didn't know. And my night terrors were getting worse. And the way I'd felt was exhausted in the day, and then had to like pack back boxes and everything like that. So finally, I went to my mother and I said, and usually, by the way, women don't recognize. Our unconscious a lot of times saves memories or puts them in the back of the mind so it can help us to have peace, and or save us from having a mental breakdown or whatever it is. The unconscious helps us with that. But and so often, if somebody's been sexually abused, sometimes they won't remember until many, many years later. And it is, interestingly, in the 30s when women remember. And it may be because of all the changes that are going on in our lives. But anyway, 38 years old, in the summer, I thought I was having a mental breakdown of some sort. And I went to my mother and I said, Mom, and I felt dirty. I felt guilty. I didn't want to ask the question because I thought it was so absurd. I went to my mother and I said, Mom, was I ever sexually abused? I said, I know it was a ridiculous question and I'm sorry I'm asking it. And it's because I had done some research on the internet about the dreams I was having. And so my mom said, yeah, I thought you remembered. And all of a sudden, tears came flowing down. It wasn't because I was sad, but it's because I was relieved. I was relieved to understand that I wasn't going insane, but that those feelings, those dreams were coming from somewhere, that it actually had occurred, and that it was just my way, my mind's way of helping me to work through those bad things that happened. So, so I didn't understand that. And I often, again, I anchored myself in negative things often, and I didn't understand a lot of the emotions. And so when I went through that class and did timeline therapy, I was able to get rid of anger. I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck? I understand now. And then I went and studied about the emotions to understand where they're coming from and what they are, and to understand 3,400 emotions. That's amazing. That's a wonderful thing that human beings can have. And so I'm going to be having a client soon. And one of the things that they're dealing with right now is anxiety and stress, with a lot of people are dealing with. And I said, your task, your homework before we meet is to find out where that stress is coming from. So please go on the internet and study stress. Just say, what emotions come with stress, and figure out what those emotions are so that we can work on those. And so again, it's emotions that are trapped that are causing these other things. It's, you know, it's kind of like the pot that you have so much water in it, and then you just keep on filling it and filling it and filling it with pasta or whatever it is. Pretty soon that water is going to overflow and you're going to have a mess, and you're not going to understand where that mess came from because you just kept on filling that pot up, and it's going to overflow. So again, you are having emotions, you are having feelings. It's okay to have those feelings and emotions. However, we want to get to the root cause and help get rid of those negative emotions so it doesn't stop you from sleeping. So a lot of people are dealing with sleeplessness right now because of the anxiety and the stress, and that's coming from some emotion that's trapped. So that's all I wanted to share with you, is that about emotions, that there are many, 3,400 or even more. There are many, many emotions. It's okay to have every single one of them. But we should work on the negative ones, because if we do stuff those down, we're going to have health issues. We have high blood sugar, or we've got diabetes, we've got high blood pressure, we've got heart disease, we've got IBS. That's something that I've dealt with, and I know now that it's linked with the emotions that I've stuffed down so long. I started my IBS right after my mission from my church. During the mission, I actually became anorexic because I was dealing with control issues. And again, that was connected with anger. I had a lot of anger, not with the church, not with anything like that, but I was immature and I had a lot of anger, but it wasn't because of an individual, it was because of me. I chose to have that emotion because I was triggered, and the trigger, I chose to be triggered. But I didn't understand that back then, but I do now, because now when I have emotions, I stop, I think, where is this coming from? And let's work on it, so I don't have to keep on dealing with that negative emotion. But that's all I wanted to talk about tonight. So thanks so much for listening today, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.